It's Harsanyi time. Our buddy David Harsanyi from National Review in the mix to tell us everything that's going on this week. He is the sage of the Beltway. I don't know. He lives inside D.C. somewhere, or in the Beltway at least. David, great to have you on.
Thank you for that introduction.
You're not a swamp creature, but you are swamp adjacent. So at least you get a good view of all those swampy things that are going on there. You can tell us what's happening. Let's start with where are lockdowns, up here in New York City. It's very clear we're going into, it's going to be the same game. Okay, guys, we're just doing this thing, but in 2 weeks we'll reevaluate. And I want to say the dumbass counterproductive thing you're doing isn't going to stop this. So in 2 weeks it'll be, well, you guys didn't do a good enough job, so we got to do this other terrible thing now. We can all see it coming. How's it going down by around you?
Well, I'm slightly confused because Andrew Cuomo had a book out about how he got the lid on this and it was over and he handled it so well, and yet now we're back to what was happening before, right? It's the same thing everywhere, and what bothers me most about this, a few things bother me, but one thing that bothers me is that no one's even concerned that we have, I shouldn't say no one, but people seem to be very concerned that we have governors acting like dictators. There's literally no legislatures in session passing these restrictions or laws. It's just whatever the governor wants. How long does an emergency last? Coronavirus is a serious pandemic. It's killed 200,000 people, but there is a 99% or above, survival rate for people who get it. Is that the kind of emergency that allows governors to do whatever they want, close churches, stop people from seeing their families? It's an insanity. Right?
And it seems to me, Davey, that there's not nearly the pushback on this that I would have expected. And look, I'm just going to say it. I think the Trump administration on this has been, and I think a lot of it was driven by politics and the need to not continue to get beat up, with the COVID attacks leading up to the election. But the DOJ, I'm sorry, you can't have governors telling people that they can't go to church. You can't have mayors staking out, Orthodox Jewish communities like they're selling heroin out of the back of the synagogue just because they actually want to gather and worship and do their religion. It's crazy to me.
Especially when you have two sets of rules. You have one set of rules for Hasidic Jews in Brooklyn, and you have another set of rules for BLM protesters, and another set of rules for people celebrating that Trump lost the election, And at some point, this hyper focus on religious Jewish people starts to seem a bit anti-Semitic. And I'm not, I don't want to just throw that around, but I guarantee you that wouldn't be the case for any sort of, African American church in Brooklyn, and it's getting to be quite ugly, I think, because you create the perception that it's Hasidic Jews who are like spreading this, but yet it spreads in all states, it spreads all over the place, it spreads in states. There are spikes in states where there are no mask mandates, and there are spikes in states where there are. It's clearly something that is running through society, and same thing in Europe. No matter what kind of lockdowns you have, unless you're a really small country. And this idea that there's some exemption in the Constitution that allows you to simply make any rule you want because of coronavirus, it's such a dangerous thing. We have these rules specifically so that when there are times of emergency and there are times where someone will abuse their power, that it withholds them back. But yet it doesn't seem to be the case. And, maybe we need more lawsuits. I don't know. But, the idea that you can just shut a church down or shut a gun show down, as they did today in Virginia, these are constitutional rights. It doesn't say they're constitutional rights except when you get sick. It is what it is. And no one seems to want to defend it, or very few people.
David, I know this sounds perhaps a bit extreme to some, or maybe this sounds like it's exaggeration, but I really do believe it would be fair to say that parts of the Bill of Rights have been suspended during COVID. When you have governors, as we've been talking about, telling people, we will arrest you if you show up to your church because we say so, that feels like the First Amendment is null and void. when you have, some people are confronted with police and fines and dispersal orders for gathering outside, anti-lockdown protesters, while others are celebrated by the authorities, BLM protests and riots and looting, of course. That feels like a violation of equal protection. I feel like we need to start using those terms.
No, I completely agree with you. Obviously, you have politicians. Give you an example: the Attorney General in Virginia, who is online celebrating the idea that he's shutting down gun shows, which are no more dangerous than going to a Walmart, which is open, because it's guns and because he wants to undermine the Second Amendment and because he doesn't want citizens to have to practice their Second Amendment rights. And the same goes with churches. The kind of hypocrisy in coverage of Hasidic Jews getting together, or church or mega church people getting together, and then BLM protests and the celebrations that went on in Times Square and elsewhere when on election night. It is distressing if you care about the First and Second Amendment and the Fourth and the Fifth and even the 10th Amendment, in the way that people are acting and the way Joe Biden is now talking about national mandates. He's not empowered to do that. Governors are not empowered to stop people from going to church or visiting their families or interacting. And, just because we have an emergency doesn't mean that those things are no longer, active. So I think this bodes poorly for us if we had some kind of bigger emergency, not just one that is, and don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying what coronavirus is, but it is something that most people will survive and most people will be okay with. So, 99%, whatever the number is. And the idea that that is enough to just suspend the Constitution, I can't imagine what would happen if we'd had some, widespread emergency that affected everyone.
We're speaking to David Harsanyi. He's a senior writer at National Review. David, even good old Nicholas Kristof, honestly, I know some people find him to be not that smug and annoying. I find him horrifically smug and annoying. I'm not a Kristof person at all, and having met him a couple times and had to deal with him on TV. But even he admits now that Trump was right about schools, that the Republicans were right about schools. There is no argument anymore. Remember back in August when they were talking about how, schools will be super spreaders and the kids will die, and basically no kids die. I mean, I'm being serious. You're talking about the same number of kids dying nationwide. And when I say kids, I'm talking about under the age of 18 dying from COVID nationwide, as die from meningitis in any given year, which is a disease that can kill you and does spread in schools and prisons and places like that. And yet we shut down schools in New York City. I mean, the journos, don't they have children? Don't they understand how insane this is? When even Nicholas Kristof admits that the lockdowners were wrong and that Trump and the Republicans on schools were right, how does this not penetrate?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer to that. I would say that hopefully people realize that this is the teachers' unions mostly and their power, especially in places like New York City, where they get this done for teachers, not for students. We know that they're not really spreaders. We know that I forgot what the infection rate is, but it's minuscule, like 0.23 or something like that. They are not super spreaders. It is not dangerous for children. For most children, they're probably in more danger of being at home, and they're certainly in a worse situation for their academic future and for their mental well-being sitting at home. And then think about all the parents who now can't go and work, or people who don't have a lot of money who can hire babysitters and so on. It's a tragic situation, and to go back and forth the way they do on a whim without explaining it really. I mean, you saw Cuomo the other day at the press conference yelling at a reporter who dared ask him a question about this. It's a disaster. It's a generational disaster, or can become one if we continue acting this way. We don't even, vaccines are coming, but we don't know exactly how that plays out. So you can go into another year with this. You're taking 2-3 years of a child's life by not letting them go to school. And there's, not to get too deeply into it, but, teachers can assess learning disabilities, or they can assess mental problems or things like that, or depression. A lot of times teachers are the ones who see that, and they're not being able to identify those problems, and you're just creating an immense generational problem, I think.
I mean, I remember, David, I'm somebody, I fell behind in school at a young age. They thought I was going to have to go to a special school. I had, which is interesting for somebody who's a radio host now for 10 years, I had a speech impediment. And all of this was around second grade, third grade, very important formative years. If I had to stay at home and stare at a computer screen and did just click on things, I mean, I don't even know what would have happened, right? I turned all that stuff around and had a much better, brighter academic future than anybody would have thought at that point. But but I'm just making this point that what you're saying is so spot on here. There's no real counter argument to it. But the Democrats, it's just all about power and what they want. I mean, it is about the teachers' unions. And honestly, just letting a bunch of lazy asses stay at home and get a paycheck. I mean, the people that work at my local grocery store, God bless them, the clerks, the manager, they've been there every day of COVID. They've never shut down. They've showed up to do their jobs. They're all still alive. They're all still fine. They can show up to make sure that my neighborhood's got groceries. But, fourth grade teachers who are mostly in their 30s and 40s, if not younger, they can't do their jobs?
Right. And part of this is, and I hate to get too political, is that they have a monopoly on schools. So there's no, I'm not sure about New York, but I think that the private schools are going to continue to be open, Catholic schools and so on. So you can't even make decisions, and most people can't afford to send their kids to private schools. So they're stuck in these schools that are closed down, and they don't have much of a say in it because it doesn't even go through the legislature, I don't think, right? I think Cuomo just closes the schools down when he feels like it, or de Blasio, whoever makes that call.
Yeah, it's just based on arbitrary numbers that they set up. Yeah.
Right. And there's no evidence that these are super spreaders. If you look to Europe, there's no correlation between those things as far as I can tell. And, it's funny because when this first started, I was very willing to listen to the lockdown people, the mask people, everything like that. I want everyone to be safe. I want my neighbor to feel safe when I'm around them, etc. But some things like masks, there's all kinds of evidence out there about masks. It doesn't hurt me to wear one. I wear one. But with the schools, it's overwhelming evidence that they are not dangerous. There's overwhelming evidence that children are not in danger. There's overwhelming evidence that if you're in your 30s and 40s, you're probably not in any danger either. You have to protect vulnerable people. And there are people who have immunosuppressed systems or are older, and we should do that. But to shut all of society down, I don't even understand why most Democrats want that. I could understand it when they were trying to hurt Trump, and I'm not saying they made coronavirus up. It's a hoax. I'm just saying that they were much more prone to try to shut
No, but they
down.
weaponized it.
Yeah, exactly.
They weaponized it against Trump, but now they're continuing with that weaponized mindset against the American people. That's what we're seeing.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're seeing. I mean, it's a CNN, I just, S.E. Cupp, who we both know, right? We all worked together, I think, for a short time. Today she's out there saying, there's a correlation between states that don't have mask mandates and those who do. And then they take a snapshot in time of today and show you the spikes. New York last week had the biggest spikes there were, and everyone's supposedly following all the rules there except for Hasidic Jews, right? So how is that possible? California had a huge spike. When you look at Europe, places like Belgium and Germany even, and elsewhere, there are huge spikes where supposedly everyone's listening to the rules. It's clear to me that some small countries have been able to contain this, Norway maybe, or wherever, Singapore, I don't know.
Yeah, New Zealand.
Yeah, UK. Even they have trouble, and they're an island that can just shut down. We cannot do that. We just can't. And I think the economic cost and the cost to our children at this point for more lockdowns is just too immense. And it was first.
I'm with you, David.
Now it's just no one can have it and no one can die, and it's just not a way to run a country.
Absolutely correct. David Harsanyi, everybody, read his latest at nationalreview.com. Always a voice of reason. David, thanks so much, man. Good to talk to you again.
Anytime. Thank you.